What's the creepiest encounter you've had with a complete stranger that still gives you chills? Story 1. When my son was a toddler, I made a late-night run to a 24-hour Walgreens to pick up a prescription for him. We lived in an urban area where that Walgreens was actually busy at that time of night. It was also right next to a metro stop and was not a place where most people drove, so parking was super limited. I ended up parking at a curb a bit away from the store. When I got back to my car, a youngish, very normal by my estimation guy came up to my window. I rolled it down a bit and he said, "I think I know you from XYZ place." I had actually been to XYZ place before. Place was also a very popular place, so I tried to remember him. In that split second that I hesitated trying to remember him, his eyes went completely black, his whole face changed, and he grabbed the door handle of my car and tried to open it. I put the car in drive and peeled out of there looking straight ahead. Only when I got to a red light a few streets away did I realize that the overhead light was on. He had actually opened my door a bit and I hadn't realized. I never forgot his face. How it changed. I remember one of Ted Bundy's victims, survivor obviously, described how his face went from normal, attractive, friendly to black-eyed, unrecognizable, and frenzied. That's how this man transformed. There were some missing women in our city, and I always wondered if this guy did it. Story 2. I was in Vienna during Christmas break. There is a large open-air market in the middle of the city, and thousands of people were milling about, eating, drinking, and shopping in the evening. A very attractive blonde woman with light blue eyes bumps into me and in accented English apologizes. I said no worries, and we started chatting. She says she's from Poland and she's here for New Year's visiting a friend. I mentioned I'm American but Polish in heritage, and we continued to talk for several minutes. She says that she's hungry and wants to get food. I offered to buy her a slice of pizza at a booth. I get one for both of us, and she takes a bite and says she doesn't like it and wants to go to a place away from the town center. Something about how quickly she rejected the pizza, which was quite good, set off alarms, and I wished her a pleasant evening and walked away. I looped around the town center and coincidentally saw her walking down an alley with two large men, one on each side of her. Very quickly I realized that she was bait to draw me into an alley so they could mug me. I definitely dodged a bullet that day. Story 3. Driving across the country with my wife and dog, we stopped at a gas station around midnight. I was coming out of the bathroom and I saw the guy mopping the floor had stopped and was just staring out the window at my wife, who had finished letting the dog pee and was slowly walking back to the car. There was a super creepy guy slowly sneaking up behind her. He was like 20 feet back, but quietly getting closer, and my wife had no idea. So I got out of the gas station real quick and loudly went over to them, hugged the dog, said, "Let's get going," etc. The second I walked over to them, the guy turned around and ran away. My wife never knew there was a guy sneaking up behind her until I told her once we got back in the road. Story 4. I think I accidentally did one of these to a stranger before. I was working at a mall in a state where marijuana was illegal. I was buying from one of my employees, and we would regularly meet in a secluded corner of the parking lot to exchange. One night after closing, I'm driving around to the spot like I had done 100 times previously and see her car. Spontaneously, I decided to be a goofy goober. I pull in the spot on the right. My arms locked at 10 and 2 o'clock, my gaze forward. I sit motionless for a good 15 seconds before doing a super exaggerated head turn, neck whip to the left, and channeling my best Jack Nicholson Joker grin. I had the wrong car. I'm a middle-aged, bald, white dude driving a shitbox Honda Civic, and the young black lady I did this to look so terrified. I think she was having a heated phone conversation, but her survival instincts kicked in real fast, and she zoomed the fuck out of there. I learned my lesson though. I'm too old to be buying drugs at night anymore. Story 5. I was in a grocery store doing my weekly shop, and was approached by a man who said I was pretty and asked for my number. No intros, no asking me how I'm doing, just getting straight to it. I politely declined and said I wasn't interested. He became persistent, so I ended up telling him to just give me his number so I could end the interaction. After he gives me his number, I go back to shopping without incident, or so I think. It turns out that this man was keeping an eye on me from the dairy section as I was walking up and down the aisles. As I'm getting ready to head to checkout, he decides to approach me again. This time, he's super agitated and raises his voice while asking why I won't just give him my number. I decide to be direct and tell him that I said I wasn't interested and I will not be giving my number to a stranger. He really had an issue with it, became irate, and had to be removed from the store. I was walked to my car, and he ended up following me out of the parking lot. I was on my street when I noticed I was being followed, drove past my house, and started driving towards the police station in my city. He followed me until he realized I was turning into that driveway, and then sped off. Luckily, I haven't seen him since. Story 6. I was alone at the gas station when a guy in a brown suit holding some container of pink liquid came out of a white panel van and walked over to me. He told me that he was selling the liquid as some kind of carpet cleaner. I still lived at home and had no need to add to my parents' cleaning supplies, especially since this was an unmarked container that looked like paint remover. I explained this to him while just having a bad feeling in general. I don't know exactly why, but my spidey sense was tingling. He asked where I was going, and I exaggerated a board game night at my friend's into a party at my friend's house. He smiled and said, "I bet you get all the girls at a party like that." I didn't. "I used to be like that when I was younger," he continued. Then something changed in his face, and my internal danger sense lowered. "We're cool, man," he said as he smiled at me and closed himself back into the panel van. It could have been a face value interaction, but to this day, I feel like it would have been a big problem if we weren't cool by the end of the conversation. Story 7. My wife and I stopped at a park with our then 7-year-old daughter. My wife went off on her own for a few to look at some trees, while I took my daughter over to the bank of the lake. Seemingly of nowhere, this really creepy guy walked up and started addressing my daughter while ignoring me. He was going on about how to attract the ducks and was positioning himself in a way to get in between us. I did a quick calculation where I had a base set up to kick his ass into the ropes along the edge of the lake, which would trip him at his knees and send him into the water. I had my daughter by the hand and just interrupted the guy and pulled her away. The guy turned around and went right to his car and left immediately. My instincts were strongly indicating that this man was intending to abduct my daughter, and the chills from that experience still haunt me many years later. Story 8. I was playing at the end of the trailer park and a guy pulled up in a convertible. He said he knew my mom and held up a Polaroid across the front seat. I saw the lady didn't have the right hair color and said so. He got frustrated and insisted I should come closer to be sure. I said, "No, I'm actually going to get lunch now, sorry." He gave me a fake smile and left, so I turned around. My neighbor, who later again saved my life quite literally, was walking up with an odd expression and her purse. Found out a few years later that she had a .357 in there, and there was a serial killer killing young boys in the city for about 3 years around then. Story 9. I was driving on a back road at night heading to my parents' house when a Cadillac started following me. It was a one-lane road at night, dizzling on and off, and this guy I noticed has been following me for a little over 2 miles. At first I thought it was paranoia, so I used my blinker and they copied me every time I did it. A sole blue light then went off on their hood behind me, I guess trying to get me to pull over. I called 911 and stayed on the line until the police intercepted me. Alas, the guy ended up being wanted on warrants for skipping bail on an SA charge. Definitely came way too close that night. Story 10. I used to work in a drug and alcohol rehab. You learn to keep your guard up around patients, but most of them are pretty normal, nice people who have had a rough go of it. Every so often someone gets threatening or freaks out, but nothing we weren't trained to manage. One day I come in and there's a new patient who checked in yesterday. I meet him while supervising lunch. He approaches me and instantly, I felt a chill and alarm bells ringing in my head. He introduced himself and was perfectly polite, but there was no feeling behind his eyes at all. Just total cold blankness. I was polite back, but didn't let the conversation linger. You have to trust your gut and all. He told me I was shy and called me Shy Stevie. Real name changed, but it was similar. He always made a point to talk to me after that, and while being totally polite and relaxed, he had the most threatening aura about him. It was hard to explain. When he checked out, I was assigned to take him to collect his things, but an older employee said she would take him instead. I was pretty young at the time because she didn't like the way he looked at me, and I was relieved. After he checked out, I was going through his file to mark his discharge, and found that he had recently been in a long-term psychiatric hospital and had smashed through the safety glass at the nurse's station and tried to kill a nurse. He was diagnosed with antisocial personality, among other things. Really unnerving, and we probably should have been informed prior to his arrival. Story 11. I was walking my dog along the canal path on a chilly winter day when I noticed a man on a bike pedaling towards us. I moved over to let him pass and noticed he was a little odd looking. Long straggly hair, mismatched clothing, sandals on his feet, and pink ribbons were tied on his handlebars. As if that wasn't enough, he had a wicker basket on the front of his bike with a radio in it. The radio was playing that creepy Tiny Tim song, Tiptoe Through the Tulips. He half stopped, said hello, and saluted me. I said hi and saluted him back. He grinned and said, "Don't go the way I've just come. I'm expecting trouble." I didn't really know what to say, so I said thanks and he cycled away. It was all a bit strange and off, so I did what he said and walked back the way we'd come. I've never seen him again. Story 12. When I was 13, I took the bus to the local Walmart, and as I was approaching the store, a woman stopped me and complimented the bag I was carrying. It was a hippie-looking bag I'd borrowed from my mom, and I thanked her and told her just that it was my mom's. She complimented me for being real about that, and then offered for her and her husband to give me a ride home. I felt really uncomfortable and said no. I'd also just arrived at the store and hadn't even had a chance to go in. She gave me a business card for some kind of car-related business like a mechanic and told me to email her, and I went on my way. I never did email her. Whole thing made me uncomfortable as hell. Really felt like I almost got trafficked or something. The other one that sticks out in my mind, I'm not even sure if it was real or if I can describe it in a way that does any justice to how bizarre it felt. I was probably 8 or 9, and I lived in a small apartment complex. I strapped on my rollerblades and was gonna head out to skate around the complex, as I often did. I rolled down the sidewalk away from our door and looked down the long, straight pathway that was just on the other side of the wall our door was on. At the end of it, a good few hundred feet away, I saw what looked like an old person dressed in a white, formless garment. They looked wrong somehow. They spotted me just as I spotted them. Then, with the most unnatural movements, they began very quickly moving towards me. Luckily, I was about 20 feet away from my front door, so I rolled back the way I came and stepped back inside and locked the door. I remember so clearly standing there against the door with my heart pounding out of my chest. To this day, I have no explanation for this memory. Nothing like it ever happened again. Story 13. I was 7. One of our neighbors was walking while I was playing in the yard. She asked me some questions. My mom came out and spoke to her. Everything seemed normal. My mom went back inside. Now I was playing with my dolls outside, typically little girl playing with her baby doll. She leans in and starts talking to me. She says something like, "You could be my little dolly. I'll dress you, change you. You can be my pretty helpless doll." Then I remember her giving me a kiss. I freaked out and ran inside. My mom came out, talked to the lady, and didn't believe me. Story 14. It doesn't give me chills, but I do reflect and wonder what would have happened. We had just moved from Illinois to Florida. I had just turned 12, so this was 86. It was a weekend. I don't remember the specific day. I got up early and went to the basketball court in the apartment complex I lived in. Started playing, and this hatchback pulls up. Guy gets out of the car and asks if he can shoot around with me. He's talking to me. Don't remember the actual conversation. I do remember him telling me that he had a job interview and needed to borrow a comb. He asked me if I had one, and I told him yeah. He asked to borrow it, and I said sure, I just need to go grab it real quick. He said that he would drive me, and I told him no, that's okay. I live right over there and I could walk. He was pretty insistent on giving me a ride. Finally, I just told him that I'd be right back. Went towards my house through the courtyard, but never went there. Waited around the corner to see what he was doing. One of the older girls that I played ball with showed up. He left a couple minutes later. Coming from small town Illinois, I was pretty naive, but that whole thing felt off. The dude didn't bother me, just the insistence on him giving me a ride. Story 15. I've been on vacation recently in Thailand, and I was walking with my 12-year-old cousin in the middle of the night to go buy some snacks from the grocery. I left the store for a couple of miles to answer a phone call, and when I got back, a white man was standing next to him asking him if he wanted to smoke weed, so I just walked in front of him and blocked his view from my cousin and told him to leave. While we were walking back to the hotel, I could feel someone behind us and kept looking back every now and then. When I entered the lobby of the hotel, I saw him walking away from us. That 10 minutes walk back to the hotel, I was so scared and creeped out that he'd do something to us. Story 16. I was walking home from work around 11 p.m. from Wrigley Field in Chicago. I walked home every night for years through these parts and never had any issue. I had my music in, but never listened loud, just in case. For about a mile I could hear someone yelling behind me, but they weren't close and I couldn't make out anything they were saying. I started to get a really bad vibe and decided to mute my music for a bit. I started to hear the voice getting closer but still couldn't make anything out until I heard a distinct, "I just really don't like gay people." I turned around and saw an old janky dude just sprinting at me full force from behind. I remember his arms were flailing in the air uncontrollably. I decided quickly to just cross the street and see if he would follow me. I turned to stare at him as he slowed to a walk and stayed on his side of the street. Once he was parallel to me, without even glancing over, he calmly said, "That's exactly what I would have done," and continued on, turning left into the train station about a block ahead. Gave me the creepiest feeling. I definitely was ready to fight if I needed, but dude had the most whacked out posture and vibe I'd ever seen. Story 17. When I was 9, I was in Kmart with my uncle in the television section. Remember when Kmart had those separate rooms for the TVs and big electronics? It was Saturday morning and he sat me and my little sister down and told us to watch the cartoons on the TVs while he hunted down a salesperson. Not 2 minutes after he was gone, we approached my 2 men and they tried everything to lure us out. We were petrified and didn't say a word. They finally lifted my sister to carry her out and was reaching for me when my sister peed on the one guy. He dropped her and she started crying. My uncle heard her and came running. The guys bolted. I still think about that all the time. We were so lucky that day. Story 18. When I was about 6 years old, this would have been around 1990, I was riding my big wheel bike down my block in a DC suburb. The way our street was situated, at the end of the block was the entrance to an alleyway that took you behind all the houses. I would frequently turn down the alley and go behind our house and enter through our back gate. As I got towards the end of the block, a car was coming, and I stopped and waved my hand indicating that they could go ahead and I would wait for them to pass. The driver in the car refused to go and motioned for me to turn instead. So I went ahead and entered the alley. I got about halfway up the alley, not quite to my house, when someone grabbed me from behind. It was the driver and she was pissed. She had turned into the alley after me, drove down, parked her car in the middle of the alley and gotten out. She yanked me up by the arm and screamed in my face, "Don't you ever use police signals with me." I immediately began sobbing, ran to my house and told my parents. By the time they ran out the back door, the driver was gone. I'm 38 now and still think about it. Story 19. At 16, I was admitted into adolescent psychiatry for a few days, due to my mom setting me up. Even had a staff member tell me, "You don't belong here. Why are you here?" Anyway, I was admitted at night and they gave me some drug to calm me down due to me being furious from it. There was no available dorm, so they trusted me enough to put me in a guest-type hospital-like room that actually I was able to wake up and walk to front desk. Immediately, this Jamaican chick about my age walks up to me, says, "Give me your hand." I actually thought she was a staff member, and she says, "None of us belong here. Please understand God works in different ways, and your dad wants you to know he loves you and is watching you. My dad passed when I was 5. I asked, "How did you know?" She just smiled and walked away. Found out she was a patient. I still think about it. Story 20. I am a petite woman, and I was walking my dog before a hike in the early AM in the city. I cross paths with a man going the opposite direction and make eye contact and give a polite smile. The man abruptly turns around and starts walking behind me. I turn, he turns. The next block, I turn, he turns. The third turn, when he followed me, I start to jog a little and look back, and he has started to jog. I take out my cell phone and wake up my husband and yelling into my phone say, "Hey, I am almost home. Can you meet me outside the house?" I stayed on the phone with him repeating the same request. He was confused but complied, and when I made the last turn onto my block, the man turned the opposite way. I was shaking and immediately broke down crying when I got to my husband waiting for me outside. I always wonder what this man's motives were or what would have happened if I hadn't taken out my phone and called my husband. These were incredibly scary stories, but if you have stories of your own, feel free to write them below in the comments so I can make a video on them in the future. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you liked it.